Our session today is an opening session related to main topics of ethics in AI development. And I'm just going now to share my screen with the talk I've prepared. And I'm going to address what we've been already hearing about for quite a while now, which is responsible AI. And I'm going to try to answer, or at least point to some directions in which we can answer the question, where is responsibility in responsible AI? And I'm focusing on this topic because I think we can all agree that responsible AI is already a buzzword for quite a while. And it has been taken to mean various things, from AI capabilities to the role of people involved in AI deployment, maybe from ascribing blame to what has happened to assuming a prospective role. And most topics that are associated with responsible AI concern, for instance, transparency, explainability, fairness, trust, and privacy, but this is just to mention a few of them. And according to the OECD AI Policy Observatory, we have currently more than 600 national AI policies worldwide. But researchers have already highlighted that most of these policies rather endorse a prescriptive approach or a principles-based approach, which is rather a top-down with abstract requirements for a deployment. And they are usually grounded in the most spread two main ethical theories currently, which is consequentialist or utilitarian ethics and the ontologist ethics. And I'm going to come back a little bit on these 2 points. And the problem is that many times adopting a type of AI policy rather refers to or resumes to sort of thick box ethics or ethics washing, or it has been termed as ethics shopping or ethics shrinking. And my argument today is going to be towards adopting a rather different approach, which comes from Aristotelian virtue ethics that endorses a rather contextualized, the bottom-up approach to AI deployment. And I'm going to develop this a little bit more very shortly, but just to have all of us here on the same boat, maybe just 2 basic points regarding what we generally mean by ethics, because this is such a general concept that we don't necessarily have a single or common definition. But just to make a short distinction, we usually refer to morality when we look into factual standards of behavior that pertain to some particular community or culture or society. And we refer to ethics when we want to look into the study of morality, the theory over morals, and to identify criteria and to develop theories to distinguish between moral and immoral actions and develop various assessment methods. And it is important to look at first into the moral relevance of an issue, of a topic, of an action, etc. And for instance, we can see if an action is morally relevant or significant as long as it is either intrinsically good or bad, or the scope or the goal of the action is good or bad in itself, or maybe the consequences of the actions are good or bad. And very broadly speaking, when we discuss morally significant issues, we refer to their potential to affect for better or for worse our lives or the lives of other people around. But of course, for quite a while, we've been taking into account animal ethics, environmental ethics, and maybe more recently, machine ethics. So moving further to the ethical or moral dimension from responsibility, because as I said, responsible AI is already a buzzword, but I'm rather interested in the ethical dimension in responsibility, because overall responsibility is a concept that pertains to legal fields and other fields that are not necessarily linked to ethics. But the type of responsibility which is further subject to moral evaluations in terms of blameworthiness or praiseworthiness is what I mean by moral responsibility or the ethical dimension of responsibility. And here we have several interrelated aspects, but I'm going to move forward so that we leave maybe time for questions if there is a lot of interest on this topic, because I wanted to reach to virtue ethics, which is my proposal today into looking to issues related to AI deployment. Because virtue ethics brings some different perspective to AI deployment compared to the ontology and utilitarianism, which are usually the most spread ethical theories that philosophers and ethicists work with. So unlike the ontology, which is rather focused on actions relative to moral duties, for instance, we refer to categorical imperatives developed by Kant and Kantians. And unlike utilitarianism, which is rather focused on consequences of actions relative to the greatest good for the most people, virtue ethics brings a different perspective, as I was saying, and this perspective is focused on human character and on virtue development and how they contribute to human flourishing. And virtue ethics tells us to act as virtue requires, which means to perform the right actions for the right reasons and in the right circumstances. And I'm going to go to a brief quote from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the book which is considered to be the grounding work of contemporary virtue ethics. So Aristotle would say that the virtuous person will have the right feelings and perform the right actions at the right time about the right things towards the right people for the right end and in the right way. And there are basically two main types of virtues or excellencies that virtue ethics puts forward, which concern ethical virtue or virtue of character and the anoetic virtue or virtue of intellect. And for the first, for the former, we can exemplify through courage, patience, perseverance, etc. And for the latter, with reasoning, intellectual abilities, wisdom. And among all the ethical virtues, the virtues, both ethical and the unethical, promoted by virtue ethics, I would say that practical wisdom or phronesis is most important, because this is a sort of a moral compass that enables us to discern the right thing to do relative to the context of action. And this is important, an important point highlighted by virtue ethics, that we shouldn't simply apply rules of conduct or look into consequences of actions, just as theories from the ontology or utilitarianism would point to, but rather we need to all the time focus on the context of action. And this is what I would highlight for as a takeaway for the remaining of the week, that virtue ethics requires us to focus on the context of moral communities in which AI is developed and deployed. So what virtue ethics highlights is a human-centered and context-based approach to responsible AI. So putting virtue ethics as a relevant ethical framework for responsible AI deployment means that we need to focus on the context of moral communities in which AI is developed, and in particular on the moral responsibility of the people involved in the AI deployment, but also the companies, of course, involved. And this means paying a particular concern to training designers, engineers, computer scientists, etc., to responsibly develop AI solutions. And overall, keeping humans in the loop to ensure that the decisions that AI systems take are indeed responsible. So to answer the question, where is responsibility in responsible AI, I would like to highlight 3 levels that were previously discussed by Virginia Dignum. And this is something that I've been also working on in applying virtue ethics to these 3 levels. And these are ethics by design, ethics in design, and ethics for design, for designers, for those who deploy AI systems. And so for the first level, ethics by design, it is important to focus on issues regarding reliability and even desirability of deploying highly autonomous AI systems, potentially endowed with ethical decision-making. And we need to focus on the context and on practical wisdom when evaluating whether we need, and we can rely on this type of highly autonomous AI systems. And then moving on to the next level, which is ethics in design. This is a focus on humans designing and deploying AI systems. And the focus would be on the human role responsibility for AI deployment cycles in order to specifically avoid ignorance of ethically relevant issues. And here virtue development would bring most benefits and insights. And finally, ethics for design or for designers, which I think is maybe the most relevant dimension when we refer to responsibility, moral responsibility in responsible AI, requires us to focus on the communities of AI deployment and on their moral standing, to look into the impact on and influence of various social networks and of context, including social context, but also corporate contexts. What are the interests of the stakeholders involved in AI deployment? And my highlight here would be for a participative co-design where all communities are involved and point towards human flourishing, but an inclusive human flourishing. And I'm going straight forward towards the end of my talk and leave some more room for discussions, but not before highlighting human responsibility in responsible AI deployment. And a key point I would like to highlight is that to become context sensitive to the moral demands of various communities, humans involved in AI deployment would need to specifically become aware of their own role and its implications in deploying AI inside and outside their own networks. So go beyond their basic network and explore what are the interests, the impacts on other people around. And I think this is important for the summer school in AI ethics because it offers its participants this broader approach to issues related to AI deployment. And on the long run, some interesting things to highlight would be to concentrate on ethical counseling related to AI deployment, on ethical education, for instance, transdisciplinary education that integrates arts and humanities with STEM education. And very importantly, ethical training, which is more or less what is going to happen over the remaining days of this week, which is uses various tools such as thought experiments, scenarios, and stories to develop moral imagination and critical thinking abilities to support morally sound decisions from those who deploy AI systems. And some of the implications, very briefly sketched, is that responsible AI in Aristotelian virtue ethics framework means to look into AI systems as assistive yet intelligent and interactive tools for human use and benefits, and focus on the way human virtues and character are shaped by interaction with AI systems. And this means that we can ensure that humans not only remain in the loop, but they also design and control the loop of responsible AI. And there is a nice quote from Virginia Dignum that I wanted to share with you, and it goes like this: "In a world where machines can find all answers, it becomes imperative that all people are well trained in asking questions and evaluating answers," which I hope that you'll be able to do with due care over this week of the AI Ethics Summer School. So maybe the three key takeaways from my talk today, and one of them is actually a question, and the other 2 points point to directions to answer it. I think we should all focus on how we can and we should live well with AI systems. And maybe to answer this question, one direction would be to focus on the context of moral communities in which AI is developed and deployed, but also to design AI systems that contribute to human virtue, development, and flourishing, including those who are least advantaged, the worst off, the left out, or the marginalized. So hope to hear your thoughts and questions related to the points I've raised. And briefly, I'm going to give the floor to Jill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihaela, so much for starting off this talk. And thank you also for the organizers for having me here. I wish it was always nicer to kind of be able to see the room that you're talking to. But it's also good that I'm not there because I have COVID. So I apologize if I'm not as sharp today, or if you hear me sniffling, it's just me recovering. So I hope everyone will be comfortable enough for that. So I think earlier was already mentioned that I'm Jill from the Racism and Technology Center, and I'm also a PhD researcher at the University of Amsterdam. And today I'm really here, I think, as a capacity more from, I guess, civil society. And I'm also touching on topics that I think can sometimes seem very controversial. So I hope that people can have an open mind, and also note that I will be taking, I think, quite a critical perspective to the talk. So I think Mihaela kind of started off with a more philosophical kind of theoretical dynamic, and I think I'm giving the perspective a little bit more from the ground. So the talk today will, I think, broadly talk about addressing the invisibility of racism in AI and other related technologies. Very quickly, the structure I think that I will be following today was I'll just give a brief introduction of the center, what we do. I'll provide 2 examples of algorithmic systems that have been discriminatory or racist. And then I want to take a bigger, link it to a broader kind of dimension of AI development, and then talk a little bit about the discourse around AI ethics, and then some concluding remarks before we open up for discussion. So the Racism and Technology Center, it was set up a year ago, and I co-founded it with Naomi Appelman and Hans de Zwart. We're a foundation based in Amsterdam, which we're running voluntarily. So my full-time job is still doing a PhD. And part of this was kind of set up because, as was mentioned earlier, that we're trying to bridge anti-racist organizations and digital rights organizations doing this work. For the former, it's very much because they lack sometimes the time or expertise to address racism in a technological context. And for the digital rights organizations, oftentimes, I think when it comes to issues around racism, it becomes either a controversial topic or a blind spot topic, a blind spot for these type of questions related to racial inequality and injustices. So we build on the work that I think have been done by EDRI and DFF, who have been pushing this work on the front. And so very briefly, we have a database, a newsletter, and a fellowship, which actually I'd like to take this opportunity to plug because we are looking to fund 3 project ideas on this topic of racism and technology. So if there's anybody in the room or people that know who are interested in that, please email me for more information. But I think the core reason, I think, in being part of these discussions is really to decenter technology in a lot of these debates. The way that our technology is used, developed, applied, deployed, is a reflection of our society, but then it's a distorted reflection in the sense that it can make some things more visible while obscuring other things. So our belief is that the structural and institutional racism and discrimination becomes visible in the technology that we as a society use while making other things complex, opaque, and invisible. A lot of the research has shown, I think, technology's driving role in exacerbating and perpetuating forms of discrimination and other social injustices. And new forms have emerged through the use of algorithmic systems and AI systems, in which a lot of disadvantaged and racialized groups bear the brunt of these systems. And it cannot, I think, these harms cannot be taken out of the social and historical context that produced these systems in the first place and in which the systems operate in. I'm gonna play a very short video now. I hope you can see it. So I like this video quite a lot because I think it demonstrates that it makes certain things very explicitly clear, that how I think on one hand, it's very clear that technology is not neutral, despite kind of this, what Ruha Benjamin talks about, the magic power of technology to make something neutral and outside of politics. and questioning the idea that how can tech be neutral if we are the ones that built the tech and society isn't neutral nor objective. And also kind of fighting the idea that technology can only be racist if it is intended. If we don't intend to build or deploy a certain type of technology, but the outcome is then, well, it is not racist. I think we've tried to challenge a lot of these assumptions in the work that we do. And two of the other main points I wanted to make also is that techno solutionist thinking and ideology doesn't address the root problem of racism, discrimination, and inequality in society, which are social and historical problems. And very fundamentally, a lot of emerging technologies have disproportionately affect marginalized and disenfranchised communities. So when we talk about AI, it's also talking about a question of its relation to power and the main idea of who does this technology serve and what is this relation between AI and inequality or AI and racism. Throughout the summer school, I hope that there are two questions that you all can maybe come back to, which is what exactly are we talking about when we say AI, and who has the power to shape this narrative and framing, who benefits and at whose expense. And I think Mihaela's kind of introduction earlier was very much about, what are these moral communities, and who is the human when we think of human-centered AI, and whose flourishing are we thinking about? In relation to the first question, there's a really good piece by the Georgetown Law Center on Privacy and Technology, which they explain that they will actually stop using the terms artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning in their work, because a lot of the times these large terms tend to obscure what the specific systems are, whether intentionally or otherwise. So it makes AI inaccessible and not understandable. But yet these systems and technologies are structuring people's lives and experiences daily, and the harmful consequences and effects of these systems are indeed often experienced, lived, and felt by groups of people, even if they do not have the language to articulate that, or if they do not know it due to either private companies not explaining it, or governments also not being clear in what they're doing. So I can link this, I think, later on. And so now I want to kind of move on, I think, in thinking about, like, is it possible to challenge and rethink this narrative that AI is necessary across all parts of our lives and societies, and pushing it a little bit further. But first, I want to kind of show two examples of AI use or use of certain algorithmic and automated systems. And those people maybe from the Netherlands might be familiar with the Dutch child benefit scandal, which is I'm gonna really not be good at saying this word, but a toeslagen affair in Dutch. And this was basically what happened was that in 2013, or since 2013, the Dutch tax authorities were increasingly using automated algorithmic systems to detect for fraud or potential fraud, particularly on people who applied for childcare benefits. And these authorities were determined and convinced by some logic that there was a lot of fraud being committed. And in this algorithm, they had one parameter, was whether or not you had a Dutch nationality. And this criteria would play a role to whether or not your risk score would be increased. Over time, this self-learning algorithm started to only really pull out or focus primarily on people from low-income groups, which means that, well, people in higher income groups are seen as less potential to be fraudsters, and conversely, people in lower income groups had a higher risk and therefore assigned a higher risk score. So basically, those that were flagged as potential fraudsters were people from low-income families, or people who needed benefits the most, with usually a migration background, so ethnic minorities. And what happened was that when they were flagged, they had to repay all these childcare benefits at once. After years of, I think, victims asserting their rights, campaigning, the media applying for FOI requests, they realized, okay, this was actually a mistake. That the government had actually wrongly flagged people for fraud. But by then, people had lost their jobs as they couldn't afford childcare anymore. Houses, they lost houses because that's were unpayable. Almost 70,000 children, I think, were victims to the scandal, and more than 10,000 families have been impacted. This has led to broken homes. Some were removed from their parents. And actually, until today, there's no substantive solution for this. This is a result of racism and socioeconomic discrimination. And actually, many of them had a feeling that they were ethnically profiled, but they were unable to prove it, even when they asserted some of their rights, to find out what led to the decision-making of their dossier. A lot of discourse around this has tended to focus on technology, which I think in one sense is a problem. But in this sense, I think that the core of it was very much the fact that there has been a history of disciplining the poor, and tech becomes instrumental to this rationalizing and normalizing view. And I think we need to be wary of disconnecting technology from the power structures and ideology, because if there is something as if there can be something, I think, as fair tech in an unfair world, in what Anna Stevens have mentioned before. There are many other examples in the public sector in which algorithmic systems have disproportionately affected marginalized, racialized individuals and groups, from policing to healthcare to housing to social welfare. We are currently assisting a student who has brought forward a case against the Human Rights Commission about proctoring. And she was, well, we argued that she has been racially discriminated through the system. And there are many examples in the public sector, which I'm not getting into now. I'm going to shift a little bit to the private sector, which is looking at, sorry, this is one of the protest photos. Uber's real-time ID system, and they use Microsoft's Face API, which is a facial recognition technology, to verify the identities of their drivers. This API has been proven to have a high inaccuracy rate on recognizing people with darker skin. This follows from the work of Tim Niggerbrew, Joy Buluwami on gender shades, and it combines facial recognition and location checking to authenticate drivers' identities. So Uber requires drivers to identify themselves by taking a selfie via the app at the start of their shift and periodically, and then this is checked against the driver's profile photos, and in some cases against public databases. And if the software is unable to make such a match, the driver can be dismissed or fired, and they could also lose their permit. And this is how it looks like, where you have to kind of constantly snap a photo of yourself. And this is a story of Pa Idris Majang, who has been working in Uber in London for slightly over a year. He was deactivated due to a selfie verification failure. He wasn't given any warnings or notified of any issues until his dismissal. He spent many messages sending to Uber to rectify the problem, asking for someone, preferably a human, to review his submissions. But each time Uber said that they cannot confirm the provided photos were actually him due to continued mismatches. So they are terminating their partnership with him. Together with ADCU, a union, Worker Info Exchange and Privacy International, they submitted a subject access request. So that's the GDPR's right of access, Article 15, which revealed that actually all the photos that Pa submitted was actually him, because this was the data that he got through exercising his request. So basically, I think I think this is just one incident amongst many who either have not discovered it or just do not, I think, have the resources to pursue it, but that Uber uses a racially discriminatory facial recognition system that dismisses its workers. And this, combined with exploitative working conditions, algorithm management, really, I think, shows an example of how technology can exacerbate both economic precarity and racial discrimination. I think oftentimes when people want to challenge the harm, a lot of damage has already been done. These drivers have faced an immediate financial and mental toll from being deactivated. In the Dutch child benefit scandal, they've destroyed, I think, thousands of lives, and these people continue to suffer. And I think taking these two particular examples out to a wider context, when you think about, I think, AI development and use, it is shown that actually exploitation is at the heart of the development of these infrastructures. So a lot of big tech companies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, etc., rely on cheap outsourced labor to develop their AI. So take, for example, data annotation. Machine learning requires large sets of training data that has to be cleaned, annotated, categorized, labeled. So tagging videos, images, transcribing audio and text, showing algorithms how to identify photos. These microwork or clickwork programs are often outsourced to countries that are that have economic collapse, are war-torn, have civil unrest, in Venezuela, in Kenya, in India, and even refugees in Syria and Palestine. People like Julian Posado, Milagros Miceli, Phil Jones have done great work around this on thinking about what does it mean for for us to use AI or for us to develop AI, because all of these people there, they earn barely less than, I think, 20 USD a week. They earn a few cents per task. They have no legal protections. They're highly surveilled. They have no rights. And these are the people that are actually helping companies and also research institutions in North America and Europe to use this data to train machine learning algorithms used in the context of content moderation, facial recognition, self-driving cars. And a lot of the invisibility of the workers in this process are really at the core of the business models of many of these tech companies that pretend that their products are fully automated and absent of any human intervention, but through a combination of very low wages, exploitative work conditions, these data workers are actually key to the growth of AI. And in the words of, I think, Vina Dubal, she says that these data workers whose labor cannot be automated make automation and AI possible. And so with that, the question is, what is there for AI ethics, right? Where does this leave us? Okay. So I think the AI ethics debate, you could be wrong about this, was really an attempt to preempt regulation. This was maybe early in the 2010s, 2012s. And I think it has been said that there's a lot of co-optation by industry and the idea of ethics washing, along together with, the fairness, accountability, transparency discourse by computer scientist Meredith Whittaker has a great article called The Steep Cost of Capture, where she argues that tech industry's dominance in AI research and knowledge production has also significantly affected the way we think about AI, how it has affected research. This goes from funding to how knowledge is exchanged, how knowledge is produced between tech companies and academia, and allows private companies to continue defining the terms and conditions of AI and AI research. So this really affects how, like I mentioned earlier, how research questions are formed, framed, who gets the resources, and there's this constant, I think, brain drain to the industry. And I think when you think about AI ethics, there's of course like the controversial firing of Tim Nicker-Brew, in which has challenged, I think, what do we really mean by AI ethics, and are companies genuine about thinking about AI ethics? A lot of these political questions are translated to technical fixes. So in a report done by Seda Gerses and Agathe Belain for EDRI, on talking about debiasing as a solution, the core point of this report is that when you talk about AI and discrimination, it's not sufficient to only talk about biased data sets, algorithms, because if not, we'll just locate the problems and solutions solely in the sphere of algorithms and data sets. These are political questions of technological development and use, and should we shift it into the domain of design, which is dominated by tech companies and tech commercial actors. So it's important not to depoliticize this issue by only focusing on the technical nature of this technology. It's really not just about badly designed algorithms or inaccurate data sets, but how racialized people, migrants, queer and trans communities, working class people, people with disabilities that are already discriminated, over-criminalized, over-monitored, are likely to bear the brunt of these harmful and intense surveillance. And I think the last point for this is that the tension between ethical business practices and underlying business models of tech companies comes into question when we talk about AI ethics. So is it even possible that you can have ethical business practice when you look at the fundamental ways in which these companies operate? Of course, this has led to there are existing and new regulatory efforts in Europe. The GDPR has shown some potential since it has entered into force in 2018, but obviously insufficient to deal with the different issues that have risen. Anti-discrimination law, I think, is really looking at these issues, and direct and indirect discrimination becomes complicated when mediated through automated systems. And of course, the AI Act, which I will not get into this now, we can do it in a Q&A, of course, has some perks, but also many shortcomings. And it doesn't really deal about, well, how is it when AI is seen as part of a larger infrastructure, and how does this larger structure that we put into place are not regulated or are not able to be tackled within this framework that are obscured, I think, in this EU AI debate. And I guess the question is whether or not does it really change the narrative? There are many laws on the table at the moment in Europe, and I think that's a commendable feat. But this also means that has been increasing co-optation by private actors in terms of lobbying. We cannot measure resources in terms of influencing policy making, and also thinking of who is at the table when we think of creating these laws. I'm not even talking about enforcement. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the GDPR when we think of these kind of things. Furthermore, I think there are limits of the law. So if you look, for example, at discrimination law, it's that, it doesn't tackle, I think, issues and harms. What I mean is that issues and harms can escape legal categories and solutions. So I think we need to also be wary of letting legalese define certain problems. And I think I'm almost time, so I will finish with my final point, is that when we think of AI ethics and when we think of regulation, I think we also need to think about what kind of genuine institutional and structural change are we thinking about, and are we really meaningfully shifting power? Because this, I think, is an uncomfortable act and requires a reckoning with our existing societies, with or without technologies. And technologies exist within a specific context that we cannot talk about meaningfully regulating these if we're not talking about the larger fundamental structures of our society. And secondly, to decenter technology and maybe reshape the AI narrative that I called for at the start. So being more, being more daring or radical with what we want with AI, right? Calling for outright bans of certain users that I think some of the civil society organizations in this space have been doing with biometric technologies, for example, and thinking of really like whose version of AI are we promoting? And last but not least, how, in this, I guess, not bleak photo that I've painted, but what can we do? And I think a lot of the time people get stuck with that. But I think looking inwards to affect change, I think, can be something that we tend to neglect. So start with our direct, immediate environments. How do we organize internally? Like some of the things that we do can be harmful, like with the intention to change the things can be harmful to certain marginalized groups. But we can start, I think, in our immediate workplaces, in the projects that we take on, in the type of funding that you want to take on and use. And how do you resist some of these funding streams or projects and coming together to build technical infrastructure? I think TU Delft, for example, during the pandemic, created the Big Blue Button, which is an alternative to Zoom. So I think there are like pockets of ways forward that I think requires us to be more reflective of our own internal processes and our own internal environments. And so that is all. And I think when I guess I was asked to also think a little bit of the ML life cycle that you all will be going into, I think, later. So I think it's like, how do these larger questions, I think, relate to the more microscopic ones that, or the more precise ones that you're looking at further down the line in this summer course. And yeah, I'm so sorry I went a little bit over, but thank you, I'm done.